The doctor slid a note into my palm that read, "Don't go home. Run." And for a breathless second, the fluorescent lights above the exam table seemed to flicker like a warning flare, as if the ceiling itself understood what my family pretended not to know, that monsters sometimes share our last names and our dinner tables. My name is Evelyn Mercer. I'm 70, and I have spent 4 decades believing that love is a ledger you balance with sacrifice. That morning, as Dr. Jonas Klein checked my pulse and complimented the steadiness of my heart, his eyes refused to meet mine. He spoke in the tidy tones he'd used on me for years. Labs perfect, lungs clear, cognition intact. But his hand trembled when he tucked the folded paper under my wallet and murmured, almost to the floor, "Family isn't always what it claims." I told myself I would read the note at home with tea in my favorite blue cup because rituals steady the mind, and I needed steadiness more than truth. But the taxi ride scraped my nerves raw. Every traffic light felt like a question I couldn't answer. The driver chatted about the weather and school fees, and I hummed in agreement like a woman who hadn't just been handed a detonator. When I opened the front door, the air felt too still, as if the house held its breath. My adopted son, Daniel, stopped talking mid-sentence. His wife, Sophia, folded papers behind her back so fast they made a papery gasp. My granddaughter, Maya, arranged her face into a smile that never reached her pupils. "All good news," I said too brightly, setting my purse on the sideboard. "Dr. Klein says I'm boringly healthy." No one congratulated me. No one moved. We ate dinner like strangers, forks clicking, a metronome of pretense. Daniel asked about blood pressure he has never cared about. Sophia complimented a roast she seasoned herself. Maya scrolled under the table and offered me a brittle, "That's great, Grandma, so many years left to enjoy yourself." I kissed her forehead anyway and tasted the cold. After the dishes, I climbed to my room with knees that have climbed those stairs 10,000 times for laundry and birthdays and nightmares, and only when the door shut did I unfold the note with the care of a bomb tech. "Mrs. Mercer, your family met with me yesterday. They asked me to certify cognitive decline and recommend placement. They inquired about your assets and whether early access was possible. I refused. Do not go home. Run. J. Klein." I sat very still, hearing my clock tick and the old vent cough, and beneath that the soft hiss of the truth finally removing its mask. I shoved the note into my cardigan pocket and stood, not steady but unwilling to sit. At 2 in the morning, the house clicked, settling wood, dreaming pipes, and from the kitchen came the low burr of voices trying to be small. I stepped into the hall, my feet remembering how to avoid the groan in the third plank, and stood at the shadowed curve of the staircase. Daniel's voice, "Klein won't play ball, we'll find another doc." Sophia's voice, efficient as a pharmacy label. "We nudge her confusion, hide keys, move pictures, switch her pills." Sub-therapeutic, just enough. In a month, she's sundowning on cue. Maya, voice sharp with youth and want, "I need tuition now, not in 5 years." Their plan felt clinical in my bones. I pressed my knuckles to the drywall until pain became anchor, until breath returned to a body suddenly foreign. I remembered packing lunches at 5 a.m., double shifts. The night fires took our first apartment, and I walked through smoke with Daniel on my hip. I remembered Sophia crying in this very kitchen when her car wouldn't start, and I wrote a check without asking. I remembered Maya's feverish forehead cooling against my palm, the lullabies, the spelling test, the Christmas mornings. Love, 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 poured like water into a sieve that never learned to hold. Downstairs, chairs scraped. "We start tomorrow. I'll call around. Someone will sign." "And the house?" Sophia asked. "We get an appraisal lined up. She won't know what she's signing." They laughed. 3 soft, ordinary laughs that made my skin crawl. I went back to my room and sat on the edge of my bed, staring at my closet door as if it could teach me courage. "Run," the note commanded. "Rise," my marrow replied. At 4:43 a.m., when the house sighed into its heaviest sleep, I pulled a suitcase from under the bed and began to pack the first life I had assembled for myself in 40 years. Passport, deed copies, insurance cards, the little black notebook with account routes and the emergency code word my late husband and I swore we would never need. I zipped it shut and for the first time in months, felt my hands completely still. At dawn, I moved like a trespasser inside the life I had built, sliding through rooms I had painted and dusted and forgiven 1,000 times. And by 5:12 a.m., I'd left a note on the kitchen table. Errands, back later, E. Because camouflage matters when wolves watch the door, I eased the latch, stepped into a blue-gray morning, and let the chill finish waking me as the cab rolled toward the only bank where the manager still remembered my wedding bouquet and my husband's laugh. Inside the quiet branch, I smiled at Marla, who used to be a teller with chipped nail polish and is now a manager with a careful bun, and asked for two things: a cashier's check to seed a new account at a new institution, and the maximum cash withdrawal allowed without the sort of fuss that summons men who call everyone ma'am. While her printer hummed, I leaned on the counter, steady and breathing, and asked her to add an in-person notary-only flag to all my profiles and to require a secret phrase for telephone inquiries. When she asked what phrase, I said orchard, the word my husband and I chose the night we drafted wills at the dining room table and promised never to be fools. Outside, I used a pay-by-app scooter like a teenager because it didn't leave a taxi trail, zipped 2 blocks in a skirt that wasn't designed for zipping, and entered a private client bank that smells like leather and quiet money. I opened an account under my maiden name, Evelyn Hart, moved enough funds to live quietly for months, and set alerts so aggressive they'd wake a lighthouse keeper. From there, I took a rideshare under a fresh email to the Granite House, a business hotel whose elevators require key cards and whose front desk staff memorize faces the way lifeguards memorize rip currents. I booked under Hart and asked for a high floor, and when the clerk offered breakfast vouchers, requested instead a room with a safe and a door that doesn't stick. I locked 3 locks, set the chain, and finally let my lungs empty in one long animal exhale that shook loose 30 years of polite composure. Then I made tea in the little chrome kettle, lined a legal pad, and began structuring a war I had no intention of losing. 1. Retain counsel with teeth. 2. Secure independent cognitive evaluations. 3. Lock down credit, mail, medical portals. 4. Hire a private investigator who doesn't flinch at suburbia's ugliest truths. 5. Document, document, document. At 9:06 a.m., I called Larkin Shaw, a litigator whose reputation in elder exploitation cases reads like weathered granite. I stated facts, not feelings, and when he asked for evidence, I hit play on the recording I'd captured by forgetting my scarf outside Daniel's door. The part where Sophia said switch her pills in a tone that could ice a cake. He didn't gasp or cluck or sympathize. He simply said, "We move now," and looped in his investigator, Breeze Calder, a woman whose voice carries the clipped cadence of someone who has waited in more cars than she sat at desks. Breeze asked 4 questions. Who has keys? Who handles mail? Who covets the deed? Who has the most to lose? And with each answer, I felt the scaffold of their plot grow visible, as scaffolds always do when you stop pretending the tarp is a curtain. While Larkin drafted a cease and desist packet for every institution that could be conned by a forged signature, I pulled my laptop closer and set fraud alerts with all 3 bureaus, froze my credit, enrolled in USPS informed delivery, changed every password to phrases of my own making, prayers written as steel, and added 2-factor authentication to portals I hadn't logged into since my husband's last checkup. At noon, I booked 3 separate neuropsych appointments at unaffiliated clinics, spacing them a week apart so no one could claim coincidence or collusion. And I arranged for the reports to be couriered directly to Larkin. Between calls, I inventoried the contents of my purse like a field medic. Passport, health card, the black notebook with account routes, a slim USB stick with scans of the deed and marriage certificate, and Dr. Klein's note, creased now at the fold where my thumb had pressed all night like a seal. I ate almonds from the minibar and a bruised apple from my kitchen fruit bowl, the last edible in that house I'd take. And when Daniel's number flashed on my phone for the 7th time, I let it ring into the hungry silence that my new life needed to grow. Breeze texted first, a photo of Sophia at a pawn shop counter, another of Daniel pacing outside a medical plaza, and a third, their porch at dusk, Maya's arms windmilling as she mouthed, "Don't blame me when it goes bad," captured from a public sidewalk with a timestamp stamped like destiny. Larkin called moments later to read my own steadiness back to me. Banks flagged, utilities notified. Any attempt to change services triggers alerts to my office and the police liaison. We're drafting a temporary restraining order against financial manipulation and initiating a letter to your primary care clinic. No third-party conversations about capacity without your written consent. By 3 o'clock, I'd showered, braided my hair tight against my skull like I used to before double shifts, and walked to a boutique that altered suits for judges. I asked the seamstress for something that looked like an announcement, and she zipped me into a black dress that didn't beg to be liked. She said, "You look decisive." And I tipped too much because sometimes accuracy deserves interest. Back at the hotel, dusk pulling against the windows, I wrote one more list labeled "If They Escalate." Police report numbers, the financial crimes detective Larkin prefers, and the Adult Protective Services hotline, not because I am helpless, but because leverage comes in forms people respect. When my phone rang again, I finally answered. Daniel tried his concerned son voice and asked where I was, whether I'd taken my medication, whether I was confused. I smiled at the kettle's reflection and said, "I'm the clearest I've ever been," then hung up and set my recorder for anything that came next. Outside, the city lit its lamps one by one. Inside, I rehearsed the most dangerous skill I'd ever learned, leaving the door locked when someone who once called me Mom knocked on it. Breeze's first full dossier landed in my inbox at 7:42 a.m., like a thunderclap disguised as a PDF. 67 pages of suburban rot bound in timestamps and receipts. I read with the slow fury of a woman counting breaths before she chooses the temperature of her reply. Page 3. Sophia at a strip mall pawn shop at 2:18 p.m., sliding my anniversary sapphire onto the glass. The clerk refused without proof of ownership, and Breeze captured the refusal, the shrug, the flint in Sophia's jaw. Page 9. Daniel outside Westbrook Neurocare, calling 3 times in one afternoon with canned phrases. Exit-seeking, sundowning, unsafe alone. The kind of language people use when they've Googled how to sound like a concerned caregiver and not how to be one. Page 14. Maya on a porch, jaw set, saying, "Don't pin this on me when it cracks." The sentence spilling into the night like a prophecy. Breeze recorded from the public sidewalk, clean as a whistle. Then the fracture beneath their performance. Daniel had been fired 8 months ago for falsifying expense reports and had taken up the sort of betting that makes debt sweat. A note from Redline Collections promised a visit to resolve an outstanding matter, which is how gentlemen say, "We know where you sleep." Sophia, neat as a spreadsheet, had opened 2 store cards in my name with barely altered emails, evelyn.merckcr and evelyn.merckrr, and charged groceries that weren't groceries and wellness services that were motel minutes by the hour. Maya, meanwhile, had become the family's street team, preloading alibis by telling friends I left burners lit and doors open and called strangers by dead names. The lies baked slowly so they would smell like truth when the oven timer dinged. I set the tablet down and looked at the city beyond the hotel glass, cars twinning like arteries, and realized the most poisonous part wasn't their greed, it was their confidence that I would choose love over evidence. Larkin called as if cued by the thought. "We're past defense," he said, voice like dry granite. "We are building indictment." He'd already filed fraud alerts with Experian, Equifax, TransUnion, locked my credit, dropped letters at my bank, utilities, and insurer requiring notarized in-person proof for any change, and flagged my medical chart with a bright bar that read, "No third-party capacity discussions without patient." He scheduled 3 independent cognitive evaluations at 3 separate clinics, staggered 10 days apart, and arranged for courier delivery straight to his office. When they claim incompetence, he said, "We won't argue, we'll produce." Breeze patched into the call, and her recap ran cold and exact. Sophia meeting a man called Petrov in a window-tinted office that printed replacement summaries and physician letters like party favors, a bag handoff that looked like cash, a plate number that ran to a car registered to a name already known to federal healthcare fraud investigators. "We don't approach," Bree said. "We document. Let them step into the light with both feet." She also sent a still of Daniel in my driveway rehearsing a signature, my signature, on the back of a junk mail envelope. Draw, scratch, draw. A child practicing forgery as if handwriting were destiny. I made tea because rage is a poor breakfast, then drew a thicker map. On Wednesday, we'd serve a cease and desist at a temporary restraining order regarding financial manipulation. On Thursday, we'd force the bank to note my presence in person for any withdrawal flagged by our criteria. On Friday, we'd have the first neuropsych report in hand. But law is a slow escalator and theater is a fast elevator. Larkin suggested we anchor the narrative with one scene no one could misremember. "They're courting an appraiser," Bree said. "Monday, 11:15 a.m. Your house." The plan formed itself. We'd let them assemble their lie in front of a neutral professional, then we'd walk in upright, notarized, and lucid, and staple consequences to their script. I spent the afternoon in the hotel gym, walking a treadmill until my knees felt like my own again. On the TV, a daytime judge show scolded a man for borrowing a cousin's car and calling it his, and I laughed out loud at the universe's low-budget poetry. In the evening, I FaceTimed Dr. Klein from the corner of my room where the lamp made me look less tired. I thanked him for the note, for the tremor in his hand that told the truth at the risk of his peace. He rubbed his eyes and said, "You're not the first," and I hated the sentence for all the faces it contained. When I hung up, Daniel called with the brittle silk of manipulation. "Mom, where are you? You sound confused." I turned on my recorder. "I sound clear," I said. "Clear enough to tell you I will not be home for the appraiser on Monday at 11:15, but I might be present." Silence. Then the smile I could hear. "Great. We'll coordinate." "Do," I said, and ended the call. I laid out the black dress on the arm of the chair, placed my documents in a flat zip folder, and set my alarm for a time I could meet with courage. Somewhere below a tour bus sighed, somewhere across town a printer warmed to spit out a lie. I brushed my hair, braided it like armor, and practiced the 3 sentences I planned to deliver under a foyer chandelier. "This is my home. I am competent. You are leaving." Monday came dressed like a verdict. The sky a hard blue that reflected off the black dress I'd chosen because it asked for nothing and conceded less. And at 11:12 a.m., I stepped from the rideshare at the corner so I could walk the last half block to my own house with my spine already telling the story. Across the street, Mrs. Lawson paused mid-dog walk, her phone lifted with that mixture of concern and neighborly curiosity that becomes testimony when needed. And on my porch stood an appraiser with a clipboard, Daniel with a practiced frown, Sophia with a folder fat as a lie, and Maya hovering in a coat too warm for the weather. I didn't hurry. I wanted the minutes to etch themselves into the air. "Power of attorney?" the appraiser asked Daniel in a tone that suggested he'd already been burned by families who confused want with lawful right. "Processing," Daniel said smoothly. "Mother's not well." "Mother is very well," I said, stepping onto the first riser and laying my flat zip folder on the rail so the embossed letterhead of Shaw and Kelder LLP caught the sun. No one moved for a full heartbeat. Then Sophia switched to syrup. Evelyn, honey, you're out. We were just helping. You pawned my anniversary brooch, I said without looking at her, and listed my bed set on Marketplace with the caption, downsizing. The appraiser's pen stalled, then lowered. Ma'am, he said to me, professional and careful, are you comfortable proceeding with an appraisal today? No, I said, and you aren't either. Larkin's associate, Halima, appeared at my shoulder with a notary stamp and a portable scanner that looked like a wand. She handed the appraiser a letter. Any attempt to transact upon Miss Mercer's real property without her notarized, in-person consent will trigger immediate civil action and referral to law enforcement. The appraiser read fast, nostrils tightening. I won't step inside, he said, folding the letter into his folio like a talisman. Daniel's voice dropped to a whisper that thought it could bully. Mom, please, let's talk inside. You're making a scene. We are in a scene, I replied, letting my voice carry to the sidewalk and the open window 2 doors down. You wrote the script. Sophia tried the soft scare. You're confused, Evelyn. Remember yesterday? You misplaced your keys. You moved my keys, I said calmly, and filmed me looking for them. Halima fed a document into the scanner, my sworn statement of capacity, signed that morning after a neuropsych exam, the first of 3. Would you like me to read it aloud? She asked, almost cheerful. Please, I said. She read, I, Evelyn Hart Mercer, have undergone independent cognitive evaluation on this date. I am competent to make and refuse legal, medical, and financial decisions. No third party has power of attorney, guardianship, or conservatorship over me. The stamp hit paper with a thunk that felt like a gavel. Maya flinched. Grandma, Dad said... Maya, I said, not unkindly, do not finish a sentence you didn't write. The appraiser backed down the steps. I'm withdrawing, he said to Daniel. Call me when you have the POA in hand and Miss Mercer consents, in person. You can't just, Daniel began, but he was talking to a man already turning toward his car, moral compass oriented due north. Across the street, Mrs. Lawson's dog shook, collar jingling like a bell that calls a congregation. Sophia pivoted to rage so fast it squeaked. You ungrateful! After all I've, I corrected softly. Daniel reached for my folder. Halima stepped between us, one palm up, and offered him a copy of our cease and desist regarding financial manipulation, identity misuse, and unauthorized medical inquiries, the commas like iron bars. Notice is now served. Any bank contact, utility change, or medical communication you attempt triggers an alert to our office and the Financial Crimes Liaison at Precinct 17. Daniel stared at the letter as if letters could be bluffed. You don't have the money to lawyer forever. You'd be shocked what I have, I said, and watched the calculation flicker in his eyes, the quick inventory of whatever he thought he knew about me dying a small, deserved death. Sophia tried one more feint. We were worried, that's all. You left the oven on last week. No, I turned it off, and you turned it back on while I was in the garden. Maya's breath hitched. I told you that was too far, she muttered, and Sophia shot her a look that kept children obedient for centuries. Behind us, Halima slid another paper across the rail. A no trespass notice for Daniel and Sophia pending the restraining order hearing. You deliver this on your own porch? Daniel sneered. On mine. This is my porch. I took the pen, signed with a hand that didn't tremble, and let the ink dry like a ceremony. Halima photographed the delivery, the faces, the clock on the porch wall, the appraiser's taillights, the neighbor's phone raised like a lighthouse. Daniel stepped down a stair, then another, something mean rising in him, and then, just as quickly,
wilting when he saw that nothing he recognized as leverage remained. "We'll see you in court." "Yes," I said, picking up my folder. "You will."
Sophia's voice trailed me like smoke. "You'll die alone," she hissed. I paused, turned, and let the line I'd practiced land with the weight of a decade. "Alone is an upgrade from surrounded," I said. "Now leave." And they did. Down the walk I edged with hostas, past the mailbox where I once tucked birthday cards for a boy who called me Mom. Heads down, shoulders squared against a wind that wasn't weather but consequence, while I stood on my threshold, not stepping inside, not yet, because reclamation is a process, and this was only the part where you change the locks on the story. I didn't want a spectacle. I wanted a record no one could varnish after the fact, which is why at 7:58 p.m. I sat at the Granite House desk with my maiden name on a brand new account and titled the live stream "Perfect Family, Perfect Crime, A Grandmother Speaks," expecting a few dozen strangers and the kind of silence that follows women of a certain age when they say the unsayable. But the counter ticked from 12 to 120 to 1200 as if the city had cracked a window to listen. So I squared the camera, laid out my documents like a courtroom altar, and began. I said my name, Evelyn Hart Mercer, 70, competent, tired of being polite, and the chat flooded with little hearts and knives and hands raised to testify as I held up the day's neuropsych letter, the notary seal still warm, then slid into the timeline. The note from Dr. Klein, the kitchen whispers, the switch her pills plan uttered in the clinical register of a woman who alphabetizes cruelty, the appraisal ambush, the cease and desist Halima served, the appraiser who backed away like Atlas setting down a world that wasn't his to carry. I tapped play on the audio I'd captured from the sidewalk, Daniel's voice saying, "1 month and any doctor will certify," and paused so the words could settle like ash. In the chat, a nurse typed, "This is abuse." A grandson wrote, "We lost my pop this way." And a law student posted a thread of statutes like lanterns. When Maya called, the ringtone leapt across the room and the counter climbed to 5,000. I answered on speaker because the truth should never whisper twice. "Turn it off," she pleaded, voice small. "You're ruining us." And I said, "You pre-ruined this," and listed the lies she'd seeded about burners and wandering, the borrowed money for a grandma's care, and the chat turned from noise to chorus. "Tell the truth, girl," until she blurted, "I needed tuition." And I said, "You needed a conscience," and ended the call before pity could soften justice. 10 minutes later, the phone flashed Daniel, and I let it ring twice so the old reflex to run could bow and leave. He came on warm and measured, the concerned son costume zipped to the chin, threatening defamation suits and protective guardianship if I didn't come home. And I told him we were done with private threats and public performances, that I had locked my credit, flagged my banks, and courier-ordered 3 independent evaluations that would read like glass. He tried to pivot, said I sounded not myself, and I replied, "Correct! I am no longer your assumption," then added the grenade Breeze had handed me that afternoon. "Your document man, Petrov, he's known to federal investigators," which isn't the same as informant. But Daniel heard what he needed to hear because he went silent long enough for the chat to type FBI in 50 fonts. I returned to the camera and explained the mechanics, not the melodrama, of self-defense. USPS informed delivery, so no one palms your mail. 2-factor on medical portals, so no one schedules capacity evaluations in your name. Secret phrases with banks, so no one sweet-talks a teller out of the keys to your life. I read the first paragraph of Larkin's letter to providers. No third-party capacity discussions without patient.
and people begged for a template, so I promised to post a checklist when we were done, and meant it, because the only thing heavier than surviving is watching someone else drown with your hands in your pockets. Reporters started DMing, a senior center director invited me to speak, my viewer count tipped past 9,000. Somewhere in there I remembered to breathe. I showed the photo of Sophia at the pawn counter, the time stamped bright as a siren. I showed the porch still of Maya hissing, "Don't pin this on me when it cracks." And I didn't gloat. I identified. This is rehearsed cruelty. It survives on our silence. The chat slowed from fury to focus. Links to elder abuse hotlines, comments from social workers offering to verify resources, a judge's clerk hinting at the fastest route for a temporary restraining order. I ended the stream with 3 sentences I'd practiced until they fit in my mouth like truth. I am not confused. I am awake. If you are too, document everything and make the system afraid to ignore you. When I clicked end, my hands found the tremor I'd denied them. The room rang the way rooms do after a fire alarm stops. Within minutes, clips ricocheted across platforms because pain becomes content in this century. But even that cynicism couldn't sour the fact that my inbox filled with testimonies. My aunt, my grandfather, my neighbor, and offers. Pro bono consults, safe deposit box tips, a locksmith who waived his fee. Larkin texted 2 words. Beautifully boring, which is lawyer for airtight. Bree sent a single photo. Daniel on their porch with his head in his hands, timestamped 5 minutes after the appraiser left, and I felt something in me reseat on its rightful hinge. Outside, the city glowed like a circuit newly soldered. Inside, I printed the chat's resource links, hole-punched them into a binder named Orchard, and slid the binder into the safe with my passport and the brooch receipt the pawn clerk had emailed, just in case. Because stories are windy and courts are slow, and I intended to meet both with a steadiness that makes grifters call their gods.
The knock came at noon, like a confession with shoes on. And when I checked the peephole, I saw Maya in an oversized hoodie, eyes swollen to the size of her apologies. I unlatched the door, but left the chain, because love without boundaries is just a discount sign, and said, "Lobby," so we would have cameras for witnesses and witnesses for courage. We sat in 2 blue chairs near a potted ficus that had seen more divorces than weddings, and I placed my phone, face up and recording, between us like a third party that never forgets. "If I tell you everything, will you help me finish school?" she asked. The question of a child raised on barter because truth had never been free where she lived. "I can't promise outcomes," I said, hearing Larkin in my cadence. "But I can promise protection for the truth." She nodded too fast, words tumbling. Sophia keeping a photo roll of my mail so she could time packages, Daniel practicing my signature on catalog back covers until the loops looked close enough, a Google Doc titled Care Plan that was really a blueprint for erasing me, sundowning, wandering, exit-seeking, phrases they rehearsed like lines for a play. The way they staged forgetfulness, moving my keys to the freezer, my wallet to the laundry basket, then discovering them with tragic relief. "And Petrov?" I asked. Careful, because saying a name into the air changes the charge of a room. She swallowed. "They said he could make anything. Charts, summaries, a letter that says you signed a will when you didn't." She slid her phone across the table with a trembling thumb. Texts where Daniel wrote tuition and clean slates, a video of Sophia counting cash on my dining table and telling him not to waste it on bad bets this time, voice pitched low like sin whispering etiquette. "Why now, Maya?" I asked. "Because last night they said if this goes bad, they'll tell the police it was my idea to sell the jewelry, that I needed money for drugs." She wiped her nose with the cuff of a sleeve that wasn't built for triage. "I don't even drink, Grandma." The word landed like it used to,
back when we were only ourselves, and I felt the old ache try to stand. I kept my spine straight instead. Truth has a price, I said. Are you ready to pay it? It might cost the family you think you know. They already spent me, she whispered. I texted Larkin one sentence. She's ready to cooperate. Lobby. Recording. And he arrived in 15 minutes with Breeze in tow, both of them wearing the kind of faces that make liars sweat. Larkin didn't pat heads or warm hands. He opened a pad and asked for chronology, then for specifics, dates, times, app names, dollar amounts, who said switch, who said 1 month, who said she won't know what she's signing. Maya answered like someone opening windows in a smoke-thick house. Sophia took the phone and, with permission spoken for the recorder, mirrored what mattered. The fight on the porch when Maya said, "Don't pin this on me." The message thread where Sophia typed, "Get her prescriptions list." The search history for how to get capacity eval for elder and power of attorney without consent. Larkin had Maya swear to an affidavit right there by the ficus, each page initialed, each line read back. Then he slid across a sheet with 3 names, therapists he trusts because they keep confidences instead of clients. We cannot promise leniency, he repeated, but prosecutors love clean timelines and corroboration. If you're honest, it will help you more than any lie your parents are workshopping. She nodded too fast, crying the quiet way that comes from dehydration, not theater. I didn't hug her. I asked if she'd eaten, and when she shook her head, I bought 2 grilled cheese sandwiches from the cafe, and we ate them like exiles. Small bites, big gulps of water, napkins doing their humble work. After, I wrote a list titled, "What Comes Next?" and we read it together. 1. Temporary housing not tied to Daniel or Sophia. 2. A new phone number and a passcode she doesn't tell anyone who says, "We're family." 3. School counselor looped in with Larkin present. 4. Prenatal appointment, because truth-telling isn't incompatible with protecting a future. She blinked at the 4th item, the way a life rings louder when you name it. "Will you hate me forever for what I did?" she asked, a child again. "I will hate what you did for a very long time," I said evenly. "As for you, redemption is not a coupon, it's a habit. Start today." Breeze escorted her to a rideshare for a safe address that wasn't mine because enabling wears the mask of shelter, and we were running a different house now. When the elevator doors shut, I felt the tremor I'd kept at bay ripple through my arms. I breathed until the floor steadied. Back upstairs, I opened my safe and slid in a new folder labeled Maya, Statements, Evidence, Care. Because love that survives the fire learns to keep receipts. My phone buzzed, a blocked number, then another. I let them die in the dark. I brewed tea and wrote a letter that started, "To the child who may one day read this," telling truths about legacy and choosing the door marked no when the crowd chants yes. And when I signed my name, my hand didn't shake. At sunset, Larkin texted, "PI confirms Petrov's office under federal lens. Your stream pulled a detective from lunch. We're advancing the TRO." I stood at the window as the city lit itself, soft squares of mercy against a long night, and practiced the next morning's sentence out loud. "Your Honor, I seek protection, not pity. Because pity feeds wolves, and protection builds fences, and I had fences to raise before dawn." The courthouse smelled like copier toner and consequence, and as I walked up the stone steps in a navy suit that fit like resolve, I felt the city's attention lean in. Reporters murmured my name. Older women squeezed my forearm the way strangers do when they recognize a private war. And Larkin Shaw said only, "Steady in, steady out," as the bailiff swung the door and the trial of State v. Daniel Mercer and Sophia Mercer took its oxygen. Jury selection had already trimmed away the unteachables. The 12 who remained wore the polite alertness of people trying to be fair in a room where fairness had teeth. The prosecutor,
a woman with a teacher's patience and a welder's focus, opened with the blueprint. Recordings, forged applications, attempted appraisal, mailbox surveillance, credit polls, the appointment at Petrov's office captured on federal video. This case, she said, is not about care. It is about control and the tools greedy people use to get it. The defense stood and tried to drape the word misunderstanding over a scaffold of evidence. When that cloth proved too small, they reached for a sentimental net and cast family, concern, and confusion into the air, hoping a single juror would catch them and call it mercy. Then the proof began to walk. Halima read the notary logs. The appraiser testified that he withdrew because power of attorney was processing in a tone that made the words sound like a bruise. The pawn shop owner explained how Sophia tried to sell a brooch she did not own and bristled when asked for consent. The courtroom screens flickered with Breeze Calder's timestamps, Daniel rehearsing my signature on junk mail, Sophia leaving Petrov's office with a manila envelope, Maya on the porch muttering, "Don't pin this on me when it cracks." We watched the federal clip, faces blurred except the defendants, as Petrov described Package A, summary, charts, letter of diminished capacity, and Package B, draft will, while an agent's date-stamped audio narrated the cash exchange. The defense shouted hearsay. The judge said, overruled, it's their mouths. When it was my turn, I swore in and told the story without embroidery. The note from Dr. Klein, the midnight whispers, the freezered keys and reheated lies, the appraisal ambush, the live stream designed to create a clean record because private pleas fail where public light succeeds. I did not cry. I did not look at Daniel until the prosecutor asked me how it felt to hear my son propose switching my medications. And then I said, like a drowning woman, learning the lifeguard is the one holding her under. And a juror in the front row closed his eyes for a beat, as if absorbing weather. Cross-examination tried to paint me vengeful, secretive, rich, and unkind. You hid money, the defense said, waving at foreign account statements like flags. I managed resources my husband entrusted me, I answered. And I bought groceries, braces, tuition, truck tires, and relief for this very family from those resources. Hidden is different from private, and private is different from criminal. You are punishing your family, they pushed. I'm protecting myself, I said, and anyone who might be next. Then Maya walked in, hair pinned back as if she stapled herself together, and took the stand without looking at her parents. The prosecutor's questions were clean. Maya's answers were cleaner. She explained the Google Doc titled Care Plan that listed sundowning, exit-seeking, wandering before they had ever seen those behaviors. She described Sophia's mail surveillance, Daniel practicing my signature, the plan to stage incompetence by moving my things and narrating my confusion to any clinician who would listen. She admitted telling friends lies about burners and borrowed money, said the words, "I was wrong," like a person filing a key into a lock she intends to use. The defense tried to break her with shame. You're pregnant and need help, they said. Isn't this convenient? She didn't flinch. Needing help isn't a crime. What we planned was. They tried to float the idea that I'd bought her testimony. She said, my grandmother promised support if I told the truth, not money if I lied. And for the first time, Sophia's mask slipped, a hot, helpless fury that made a bailiff step closer on instinct. In closing, the prosecutor built a bridge from compassion to law. Love does not notarize theft. Concern does not forge capacity letters. And family that plots to erase your mind is not family, but conspiracy with better holiday photos. The jury took 2 hours to return. I counted the ticks of the courtroom clock and the breaths between Larkin's pen taps, and watched dust float in morning light as if the room itself were holding still. When they filed back, the foreman didn't look at anyone. Guilty, he said, on all counts. Fraud, conspiracy to commit elder exploitation,
attempted forgery, identity theft. Daniel's shoulders dropped like a tent collapsing. Sophia's lips parted, then pressed together as if sealing a letter to a future that would never arrive. Sentencing came a week later. Years that sounded like math and mercy in equal measure. And when the judge asked if I wished to speak, I stood and said, "Your Honor, I seek protection, not pity. I ask that any sentence include restitution to fund clinics and services that stop this from happening to someone without cameras, lawyers, or a stubborn streak." The judge nodded, wrote something longhand, and said, "Mrs. Mercer, the court thanks you for making a record the law can stand on." Outside, microphones bloomed like a harsh garden. I gave them one sentence, because that's all spectacle deserves. The law did its job. Now I will do mine. Then I walked down those stone steps as Breeze angled her body between me and the crush, Larkin at my side, and the wind cleaned for the first time in months. And somewhere in the back of my mind, a kettle clicked off, a door locked, and a garden gate swung open on oiled hinges.
6 months later, the mornings arrived like soft verdicts, light pooling across the kitchen of a cedar-sided cottage just beyond the city line, where the air smells faintly of rain on stone, and the only drama is whether the wren will scold the squirrel off to feed her. I pad barefoot to the kettle, clip a sprig of mint from the pot on the sill, and watch steam billow while my phone blinks the kind of messages that used to belong to other people. Thank yous from strangers, court updates from Larkin, a photo from Maya of a crib she assembled herself with instructions spread like a passport to competence. The cottage is smaller than the old house, but it fits like a confession finally told. One bedroom for me, one room half office, half library, where binders labeled bank, health, legal, orchard line a shelf with the tidy defiance of survivors. The sapphire brooch, reclaimed and repaired, sits in a dish beside Dr. Klein's creased note, both objects the color of warnings heeded. 3 mornings a week, I take the bus into the city and volunteer at a clinic that intercepts concerned relatives before concern becomes custody. I keep a drawer of checklists printed from my stream: how to freeze credit, how to lock medical portals, how to add secret phrases to accounts, and I hand them out like recipes because people don't need heroics, they need steps. And there is a holiness in watching a woman in a thrifted blazer realize she can call her bank and become the weather in her own life. Maya finished the semester, belly rounding under a denim jacket she thrifted and customized with little stitched constellations. She moved into a studio that doesn't share a wall with anyone who's ever said, "You're imagining it," and she meets each week with the counselor who teaches her to name feelings without bargaining them, a skill I'm still learning at 70. We talk most evenings about prenatal vitamins and the difference between apology and accountability, and some nights she cries. Not the dehydrated sob of the lobby, but the clean kind that rinses. She asks if the baby will ever meet Daniel and Sophia, and I say the truest thing I own. We answer that one day at a time, with our spines, not our fear. Their letters arrive from prison with the waxy indignation of people who mistake consequences for persecution. I do not open them. Closure, I have discovered, is not an answer you receive. It's a boundary you maintain until the question starves. Reporters still call, fewer now. When I agreed to interviews, I skipped the melodrama and talked logistics, because what rescued me wasn't rage or eloquence, but notarized paper and timestamps. In one segment, a state senator quotes my checklist while introducing a bill that forces capacity evaluators to verify patient consent in person. And I feel a private click inside, a hinge reseating where a door once swung wild. On Sundays, a circle of older neighbors gathers in my tiny living room: 6 women, 2 men, a dog named Poppy who was never met a lap she didn't trust, and we practice saying no out loud to each other in the present tense. No to signing justice one form, no to letting a grandson borrow a car title for a week, No to doubling a pain pill because a knee's hurted helps you sleep. We laugh a lot, eat lemon cookies, trade locksmiths, and when someone admits shame, we pass a wooden spoon and tap it twice on our knees like a gavel to adjourn the self-indictment. I planted a narrow garden that insists on thriving. Hostas and hydrangeas, thyme that tumbles like a memory that behaves. And in the evenings, I sit on the stoop with the book and let the day unspool without commentary. Sometimes the fear creeps back on cat feet, and I meet it with tea and a list the same way I met the first night. Identify, plan, act, repeat. When Maya went into labor early on a silver morning, I waited outside the delivery room humming her childhood lullaby into a paper cup of coffee. The nurse came out smiling and said, "He's here." And a minute later, I held a boy who blinked up at me as if everyone he loved had already told him the truth. We named him August, not for the month, but for the word, dignified, worthy of regard. And when I fastened the brooch to the blanket for a photo, the blue stones threw their small sky across his cheek. People ask if I regret any of it, adopting, forgiving, fighting, prosecuting, and the honest answer is messy as life. I regret the years I confused endurance with virtue. I regret the rooms I stayed in because leaving would make someone else uncomfortable. I regret how long it took to understand that kindness without boundaries is cruelty to yourself. But I do not regret waking up. Each night, I set tomorrow's clothes on the chair, habit, ritual, armor, slide the note that once said run back into its dish, relic, compass, permission, and thank whatever listens for a world where a woman can learn to love herself without apology at 70. If you are reading this at a kitchen table that suddenly feels dangerous, hear me. You are not overreacting. You are witnessing. Start with one call, one lock, one sentence said aloud like a spell. I am not confused. I am awake. Then choose the life that answers you back.